I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar this evening. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking about electric vehicles, of course, and I appreciate everybody finding an hour to spend with us today. I'm from Acorn Energy Co-op. I'm Susie Hodgson. We also have two other organizations with us today, Drive Electric Vermont, and Dave Roberts will be doing the bulk of the talking, and we'll be speaking shortly about electric vehicles, all different types that are available, the incentives, the infrastructure, and more. And then we also have two drivers of electric vehicles. We'll talk to you about their experiences. So first, I want to give a shout out to our three organizations. So it's Acorn Energy Co-op, CEAC, which is the Climate Economy Action Center of Addison County, and Drive Electric. So one thing we all have in common, the three organizations, are we're all trying to help our communities transition to a more clean, affordable, renewable energy and really support both a healthy climate and a healthy economy and try and get us to move out of this pandemic in a positive way. So we've all been driving less, and that's part of the picture, but it's not just driving less, it's also about how we can make better choices about traveling. And one of those ways we can make better choices is with an electric vehicle. So I'll pass the baton, so to speak, to Dave Roberts from Drive Electric Vermont, and he'll be taking us through a presentation for the next half hour or so, and then we'll hear from a couple of EV drivers.
Great,
So
thanks so much.
You, Dave.
Thanks so much, Susie. Good to be joining everybody this evening. I hope you're having a great day. I'm Dave Roberts. I'm the Drive Electric Vermont coordinator. Drive Electric Vermont is a public-private partnership coordinated by VIC, which is where I work. It's a nonprofit. We're based in Winooski. But we work with the state of Vermont, electric utilities, folks like Acorn Energy and the Climate Economy Action Center of Addison County to spread the word about transportation electrification and some of the options that are available. I'm going to pause for just a second and ask folks to participate in a quick poll, which is just launched. So you should see on your screen just a quick question. And you can check any of the boxes that fit while you're joining us this evening. So just want to hear if you're already an electric car owner, maybe just want to hear a little more about what's going on in the state, or maybe you're thinking about buying one. So you want information on incentives or what models are available, or you're just curious. And so we welcome all of that and more, but give folks just a few more seconds to let us know. And I see we've got a few EV owners. We've got about half of the people joining us. And right now we've got about 40 people signed into the webinar, and we had about 100 sign up, and we will be recording this and distributing it later. So anybody who needs to sign off early or wasn't able to join will have a chance to access that recording. So all of you who are thinking about buying one, hopefully we'll answer your questions. If we don't hit your questions, we are planning to have time for Q&A at the end of the session. And feel free to use the question through the GoToWebinar sort of panel that you should see to send us a question. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can at the end. So we've got a bunch of people who are just interested in learning more, and some of you are on your local energy committees and want to be hearing more about how you might be able to get involved or share this information. So I'm going to close the poll. Thanks everybody for sharing that. And in terms of what we're going to cover then, so I'll just run through kind of the overview of different plug-in electric vehicle types and the models that are out there. We'll talk some about how they charge, some of the market trends that we're seeing in Vermont, cover incentives and some of the different purchasing considerations that people have in terms of buying, leasing, new versus used, things like that. And then have two owners share their experiences with all electric and plug-in hybrid models that they purchased, and then the time for discussion and Q&A at the end. So why do we want to support more EVs in Vermont? Well, this is one of the key reasons. So transportation is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. It's about 45% of the state's current most recent inventory. So if we're not finding ways to reduce our transportation greenhouse gas emissions, we're not doing our part to address some of the most important climate change issues facing our state. So that's a key issue. And why electric vehicles? Well, because they're about 2 to 3 times more efficient than gasoline models. So gasoline engines, internal combustion engines, lose a lot of their energy to heat. Plus, they have harmful tailpipe emissions. And with electric vehicles, you don't have all that energy lost as heat. The electric motors are very efficient and getting better all the time. So we see there's a huge efficiency gain that's possible when you make the switch to an EV. That said, doesn't mean all we need to do in Vermont is just make a switch to all of us driving EVs, because we still have a lot of potential for congestion. I guess, of course, this photo was taken in pre-COVID days, but hopefully as we come out of the situation that we're in now, we'll be getting back to some semblance of normal. And for a lot of people, that may mean getting back behind the wheel. But a lot of people have discovered walking and bicycling during various shutdowns that we've experienced, and hopefully that will continue. And it's important that we think about ways to reduce vehicle travel in addition to making the switch to going electric. So just need to cover that briefly. So in terms of electric vehicles then, so there's 2 basic types. We have all electric on the left of this slide, powered solely by a battery, which plugs in to recharge, and that's connected to an electric motor. And depending on the model, you might see between 70 to 300 miles or more of range on the battery before you need to plug it in somewhere. And then we have plug-in hybrids, which have a battery and the electric motor. Typically, they'll go anywhere from 15 to 80 miles on the battery. And then they also have a gasoline tank and an internal combustion engine, so they can continue traveling on gasoline once the battery runs out. So you can go, for example, a Prius Prime. It's one model that's popular in the state, goes about 25 miles on the battery. And then you can go several hundred miles on gasoline and keep filling up. So if you're worried about charging or don't have a good place to charge, or you're doing a lot of long distance travel, a lot of people look at plug-in hybrids as a good option for their needs. So some of the more popular models on the left side are all electric, and on the right are plug-in hybrids. So we've got the Nissan Leaf, which comes in 2 flavors now, the regular, which is about 150 miles of range, and then the Plus, which is 225 miles of range. And so that's a little bit more expensive to get that bigger battery. And these models, the statistics and prices here are all for new vehicles right now. So we're just talking about new models. There are used Leafs available with less range and certainly a significant savings. Tesla Model 3 is another popular model, comes in a few different battery flavors, the standard range and the long range. Starting price is around $35,000, but for most people, it's closer to $40,000 out the door. And the Chevrolet Bolt, about 260 miles of range and about $37,000. And these dollar amounts are before any incentives come into play. So this is just the straight up manufacturer's suggested retail price information. On the right side are the plug-in hybrids then. So starting at the top, the Prius Prime gets about 25 miles, one of the more affordable EV options. The Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid is one of the more affordable all-wheel drive options, starts around $36,000. And the Subaru Crosstrek hybrid, another all-wheel drive option that a lot of Vermonters look for, that all-wheel drive these days, has a little bit less range, but after some of the incentives, it can be quite affordable. So those are some of the popular models. And then just want to highlight that on the Drive Electric Vermont website, we do have a tool, our vehicle comparison tool, which will allow you to select on different models, the different vehicle types. So if you're seeing this, this is our website. I can go to the Explore Electric Cars link on our homepage. I can say I just want to look at the all electric models or just the plug-in hybrids. I can say I want to look at all electrics that get over 200 miles of range and have standard all-wheel drive. And so you can see what those look like. And then if you click the little plus sign, it'll expand and give you more information on the battery size, the energy, amount of energy it can store, how many it will seat, the cargo capacity, if there's a federal tax credit available. So a lot of kind of the information that folks are looking for. So this is a great tool. We also have some links to some other sources of information at the top of the page that are really helpful. So we have a few models that are, some of these are on our website now. They're just starting to hit the market, and some of them are going to be coming hopefully later this year, maybe early next year to Vermont. But the Tesla Model Y is their sort of crossover. So it's like a small SUV, just launched a few months ago. That there are some that have found their way to Vermont already, and probably many more. That does have an all-wheel drive option. So a lot of people are interested in that. I'll spend a little more time talking about some of the Tesla unique qualities when we talk about charging in a bit, but they do have their own charging network that makes it a lot more convenient for long distance travel at this point. The Ford Mustang Mach-E has been a little bit delayed by COVID manufacturing issues, but hopefully still coming later this year, maybe early next. A lot of excitement about that. Ford also has their Escape plug-in hybrid, which is hopefully coming soon. It's been launched in Europe, but it hasn't started sales in the US just yet. Volkswagen has their ID.4 crossover on the lower left here. That actually, I believe just today, there is news that they were starting production of that in Germany. And they're going to be also producing that in a factory in Tennessee in the next year or two. And then the Toyota RAV4 Prime is starting to trickle into Toyota dealers in the state. We've seen a few of them already. So that's another all-wheel drive plug-in hybrid option that we expect will be quite popular. So there's probably roughly about 100 new EV models expected in the next couple of years as General Motors and Honda and other automakers continue developing their product offerings. So we can't run through all those today, and some of those plans may be changing as due to COVID and other things. So these are the ones that we're highlighting, but just know that if you're thinking about an EV in the next couple of years, there's likely to be many more options, the longer you wait. And then some of the other types of EVs that are out there that just want to mention are that we have electric buses. So this is a Proterra electric bus on the top left here, and actually there are two of these in the city of Burlington that Green Mountain Transit is running right now, and we've got several more buses expected to hit Vermont roads, both transit and school buses in the next few years. So that's great to see. We've got electric bicycles, including electric cargo bikes, which are a great option, a lot of fun to ride. Encourage anybody who's maybe hasn't been on a bike in a while and has a killer hill that they just don't want to deal with. Electric bike can really make you feel like the bionic person getting up some of those hills, and makes for a really joyful, fun ride. We've got in Burlington, CarShare Vermont has an all-electric Nissan Leaf as part of their fleet that's available. We've got electric lawn care equipment, which obviously they're hopefully not something you see on the road too often, but this is a commercial mower. There's a lot of smaller options that are available for home use, and including many utilities are offering incentives for both commercial and home use mowers. So some good savings available right now on electric mowers and other lawn care equipment. And then also electric motorcycles. So anybody who's a motorcycle fan, there's Zero is a company that's sort of like the Tesla of motorcycles. They just make electric motorcycles. And Harley Davidson, believe it or not, has started making electric motorcycles, and there are some other options. So if you're not interested in a vehicle, maybe one of these other options is something that would work for you. So something to keep in mind, EVs and Vermont conditions. We know winter is going to be here. It's starting to feel the crispness in the air these days. And on the coldest winter days, typically you'll see a reduction in your electric range of 20 to 40%. In some cases, if it's a super frigid cold day, and depending on the model, you might even see 50% loss in your range. You should see that come back as the vehicle warms up. And there are a lot of things you can do to maximize your winter range. So for example, not using the cabin heat, or minimizing use of cabin heat and using the heated seats or steering wheel. You can preheat the vehicle while it's still plugged in. If you have a garage, keeping it in the garage is helpful. So there's a lot of things that folks can do to increase their winter range, but it's important, if you're somebody who's just on the bubble, if you're looking at a Nissan Leaf, a standard one that's 150 miles range, thinking, you might see 80, 90 miles of range on a cold day, very cold day, make sure that that's still going to work for you and your regular transportation needs. And thinking about charging. So most people charge at home. At home overnight is the most convenient way to do it. A lot of people think about it kind of the way you would charge a cell phone. You just plug it in when you get home. It's ready to go in the morning. It's for many people I've spoken with, that they find it's a lot more convenient than going to the gas station. They actually really prefer charging at home. So that's a great option. If you are commuting to a workplace, a lot of them are thinking about charging or have installed it. So that's another place where people might plug in. And if you're right on the bubble of having enough range with that Nissan Leaf, maybe talk to your employer and see if they're willing to put in a charger, just so you have more confidence on those cold winter days. And then public charging is something a lot of EV drivers don't use on a daily basis, but it's really important to have it available when you're going on a longer trip. And in terms of the types of charging that are out there, different charging equipment. So usually you talk about different levels of charging. Level 1 charging on the left side here is just a unit that will come with every plug-in vehicle that's out there. Most of them just plug into a standard 120 volt outlet, and they'll give you about 5 miles of range per hour of charging. So for a lot of plug-in hybrids, these will work just fine. Plug it in, it'll be ready to go in the morning. For some of the longer range all electrics, though, it could take, if your battery was fully depleted, it could take a few days for you to get a full charge on level 1. So it's a great option for folks who maybe don't have access to a higher power connection at their home or other issues. But going to level 2 charging in the middle here really makes things a lot more convenient. It's a 240 volt charger, so kind of like an electric clothes dryer voltage. And depending on the model of vehicle, you'll get between 10 to 20 miles of range per hour of charging typically. And what's shown here are sort of two different models. The one on the left is a public level 2 charger that you might see in a parking lot at City Market in Burlington or other places around the state, where you sign up for a membership and it's connected to your credit card, and you get charged either by the hour, so maybe about $1 an hour to use it, or in some cases by the kilowatt hour energy that your vehicle uses while charging. So those are nice to have out in the world, but it's overkill for somebody's home use. So the one on the right there in the middle is a Clipper Creek level 2 charger, and that can plug into a 240 volt receptacle in your garage or nearby if you don't have a garage. So that's level 2 charging. And then on the right is a DC fast charger, and this is a much higher power. Depending on the model of charger, you're looking at typically a 480 volt connection to the power grid. Usually it requires 3-phase power, which you find in more developed areas typically. And depending on the EV model and the charging equipment, you can easily get 70 miles or more of range per hour of charging. And some of the newer models actually can do a lot faster charge than that even. Something to keep in mind with the fast charging for level 1 and 2 charging, everyone except for Tesla uses the same type of plug connector and Tesla has an adapter that they can use that equipment. Excuse me. However, for DC fast charging, there are two different plug standards. So there's CHAdeMO, which is what Nissan and Mitsubishi have been using. And then there's the SAE combo. And so this charger on the right side has both of those plugs. The SAE combo charging is basically all the other automakers except for Nissan and Mitsubishi and Tesla, which has their own charging plug. So it's important to kind of think about as you're looking at charging that's available in the public. There are some tools. This is a map from a website called plugshare.com. They also have a smartphone app, and PlugShare will allow you to filter chargers to just show the equipment that's compatible with your specific vehicle. So in this case, the orange dots in Vermont are DC fast chargers, and the green are level 2 chargers. We've got over 200 locations in the state and more on the way. In particular, the state is really focused on fast charging right now. There'll be 11 more fast charging locations coming online, hopefully in the next year or so. And once those are put in with support from the Volkswagen diesel settlement funds, it should be the case that nobody in Vermont is more than about 30 miles from one of those fast chargers. So making great strides in the public charging network here in Vermont. Also, just circling back to Tesla and their charging. So Tesla has their own dedicated network of fast chargers, which they call superchargers. And the red dots on this map are locations where they have superchargers. And each one of those dots, typically there's 7 or 8 or more charging ports that people can plug into. And unfortunately, though, these are only available for Tesla vehicles. So this is a perk of owning a Tesla. They've paid for this on their own dime. So it's for anybody who's looking to go all electric and is doing a lot of long distance travel, you can certainly do it in a Nissan Leaf or a Chevrolet Bolt, and it's getting easier as more states are investing in the infrastructure. But there's no denying that Tesla has a significant lead in terms of building out a pretty robust network of charging all across the country. So thinking about how much does all that charging at home cost you? So this is a chart just showing kind of roughly comparison in monthly transportation energy costs, assuming gasoline in the purple line is assumes about a 25 mile per gallon gasoline vehicle. And the EV line, the green line on the bottom below that, assumes an average efficiency EV, which right now is about 3 miles per kilowatt hour. And this is going about 1,000 miles per month. So over a 5-year period leading up into early 2020, you could have saved about $2,000 just on fuel costs alone. And this is not to mention any of the maintenance savings that a lot of people see with making the switch to electric, especially with all electric models. You don't have oil changes. There's just a lot less to go wrong with the vehicle. So in most cases, people find that EVs are very low maintenance compared to some of the gasoline models that they've owned in the past. In terms of where we're at right now in the Vermont marketplace, this chart is just showing EVs that are registered over the past, going all the way back to 2012. And the plug-in hybrids are the lighter shading and the all-electrics are the darker green. And you can see as we've gotten some of these longer range all-electric models, the popularity of those has really started to grow significantly, while the plug-in hybrids have maybe flattened out a little bit. But both are growing significantly, and with the advent of the state of Vermont incentive program, at least before COVID hit, we were seeing significant growth early in 2020 as a result of those added incentives that I'll talk more about in a moment. But as of January of this year, we had about 3,700 EVs. That represents about 0.5% of the vehicles registered in the state. So got a long way to go to meet some of our climate and energy goals, but we're certainly making good progress in terms of additional registrations. So what about incentives? What's out there for you? There are sort of three levels of incentives available to Vermonters right now. There's a federal tax credit. It's up to $7,500 based on the battery size of the vehicle. It does begin to sunset as each automaker reaches 200,000 sales. So Tesla and Chevrolet passed that threshold last year, and they have completely phased out of their federal tax credit availability. So there's nothing available for those purchases right now, but many of the other models do have significant credits, and there's information on each model's credit amount on the vehicle comparison tool on our Drive Electric Vermont website. It is a tax credit, so it's something that you would be claiming on your income taxes. So if you purchase one right now, there's an additional form that you would be filling out on your income taxes when you're doing those next year. So your 2020 income taxes that you do next year. So you need to have a tax liability to be able to get the full benefit of this tax credit, unless you are leasing, in which case the leasing company typically is the entity that technically owns the vehicle and can claim that tax credit and will usually pass through some or all of that credit to the leasee. If you do purchase and not lease, and you do want to take advantage of this tax credit, it's important to keep in mind that it does not carry over into future years. So if you bought a Nissan Leaf and you were eligible for a $7,500 tax credit, but your tax liability for 2020 was only $3,000, you would not be able to carry over that $4,500 into a future tax year, which is a little bit different from some of the other tax credit programs that are out there. So that's the federal tax credit. That's the highest dollar value incentive that's available. After that, there are state of Vermont incentives. It's currently up to $4,000, depending on your adjusted gross income on your tax return. And in this case, we're using 2019 income as the metric for qualifying for that program, because we don't know what folks' 2020 taxes are going to be yet. And it also varies depending on the type of EV, and all electric or plug-in hybrid. Started out last December with about $1.1 million in funding. It's currently about $250,000 remaining. So really encourage anybody who's eligible and wants to take advantage to do so fairly quickly, as that we expect those funds to be gone in the next few months. It is one of the eligibility requirements is that it's only for new EVs with a starting price under $40,000. So there are some models that start under $40,000 but can cost more after options and whatnot are added, and those are still eligible. But the starting base price for that model needs to be under $40,000. And on the Drive Electric vehicle comparison, there's a little filtering tool that you can show just which models are eligible for the state incentive program. And it is distributed in partnership with Vermont's electric utility. So Vermont Agency of Transportation is overseeing the program for the state. Drive Electric Vermont is providing support on sort of tracking the spend down and educating folks about it. And then the utilities are processing those incentives and either sending checks to dealers or in the case of incentives that are provided at the point of sale, or sending checks to their customers if somebody opts for the mail-in rebate option. And then there are electric utility incentives, which vary depending on the utility and the type of EV and your income, but those are typically up to about $2,500. And many utilities are also providing incentives for level 2 home charging equipment. Green Mountain Power provides a free home level 2 charger, and several other utilities provide a few $100s to offset the purchase of that equipment. So just a little bit diving into the weeds a little bit on the state's incentive. This is a table. I'm not going to dwell on this. This is all on the Drive Electric website on the purchase incentives page, but I'll just hit the sort of first section row here. If you're an individual whose tax filing status is single or head of household, and your adjusted gross income on your 2019 return was $50,000 or less, then you're eligible for a little bit higher incentive. So for a plug-in hybrid, that's $3,000 or $4,000 for an all-electric. And if your adjusted gross income was between 50,000 and 100,000, then you qualify for sort of the standard incentive of $1,500 for a plug-in hybrid or $2,500 for an all-electric. If your adjusted gross income is over $100,000 and you're filing as an individual, then you're unfortunately not eligible for a state of Vermont incentive. The current, and just one last thing, I mentioned that the funding is running low. Future funding is uncertain. There was a plan earlier this year before COVID hit to provide another installment of funds for that program, but that did not happen. And from what we understand, it seems like it may not be happening given all the budget pressures on state funds these days, at least in the near term. So hopefully might return in the future as things normalize on the state budget side, but at least at this point, it looks like we'll be running out of funds sometime later this year, and there'll be at least some period of time when there's no state of Vermont incentive available. And just to kind of provide an example of how all these things can stack up for somebody who's thinking about a purchase compared to maybe a regular gasoline vehicle, I've purposely chosen one of the more affordable all-electric models, that base Nissan Leaf, which has 150-mile range. Currently starts at $31,600, but if you knock off the federal tax credit, the state incentive, Nissan has what they call a fleet tail discount, which is for Vermonters these days. They have sort of special discounts for folks in some states. So that knocks another $4,000 off. And then there are utility incentives, and just using $1,500 as a kind of general example average. So that $31,000 car after incentives is just over $16,000, not including any options. And you may want to opt for a cold weather package and some of the other things that are going to bring up that price a little bit. But compared to just a regular kind of affordable Nissan Sentra, that's actually a few $1,000s less. And if your adjusted gross income is less than 50,000 and you're eligible for some of those higher state and utility incentives, then it's a few $1,000s less, at about 13,600. So some really good deals. And then also, and that's for a purchase. There are some basic leasing rates on the Drive Electric vehicle comparison as well. And you can lease a Nissan Leaf like this for, in some cases, under $200 a month right now. So leasing can be super affordable. Just keep in mind, if you do lease, you're not going to personally see that federal tax credit unless it's rolled into your lease deal. So that's the quick overview on the sort of layering up those incentives. Here's an overview of all the state of Vermont eligible vehicles that meet that $40,000 or less base price. This information is on the Drive Electric website, so I'm just going to skip forward. Quick mention of some of the utility incentives. So Green Mountain Power offers $1,500 on a new all-electric or $1,000 for a plug-in hybrid. They also offer $750 for a used electric vehicle. And we are seeing growth in the used side of the market. We need to have more new EVs in the state to really support that, but it's about 15% of the newly registered EVs in the last year are used. And so that is definitely a viable option. There's some really great deals on some of the older EVs if they work for you. Green Mountain Power is offering a sort of a bonus incentive for low and moderate income, and I mentioned the free home charging equipment. Vermont Electric Co-op is another utility that's offering incentives. It's a little bit lower than Green Mountain Power's, and theirs are provided in the form of checks, or in the case of the home charging equipment, they'll provide a substantial bill credit if you're getting equipment that's on their eligible list. And we've got, for all the utilities in the state, we've got information on the Drive Electric website. And some of them, like Burlington Electric, actually has a program right now where they're providing sort of a boosted incentive as part of their COVID recovery efforts. So encourage folks to check out the resource on our website if you're interested in learning more about the incentives. So with that, I want to invite Susan Smiley to unmute herself. She's a Prius plug-in owner, and she's going to share a little bit more about her experience driving and owning a plug-in hybrid Prius. So Susan, thanks so much for joining us.
Hello. I currently own that Prius plug-in I'm standing beside. I had it for probably 2 years. I live outside of Middlebury, about 6 miles outside of Middlebury, and about 6 miles from Bristol, and about the same amount of from New Haven, which is the town I live in. I owned a Prius plug-in before this. This is a 2013. I bought it used. I owned a 2012, also used until a deer ran it over. So I had to buy a second plug-in vehicle, but I decided I was pleased enough with the first that's what I looked for, and I found another used plug-in. Given my connection to those three sort of population centers, I find that I can, on the 10.5 miles, it gets fully charged, which it takes about 3 hours with this regular level 1 charger. I can get to and from, or almost all the way to and almost all the way back from those 3 towns. And so it suits me. I had Priuses before this, or we had Priuses before this, and then because I have solar panels on my barn roof, I decided to take this next step, and I hope to take the step to an all-electric vehicle in the not too distant future. I do own a farm truck, gas powered, and I'm a new and delighted owner of an EV bicycle, which I ride to town and then put him in the back of my pickup truck and take it to ride in other lovely parts of Vermont.
Great, thanks, Susan. And you mentioned pickup trucks, which I didn't cover earlier. There are no electric pickup trucks yet, but there are several models due to be arriving in the next few years. So we know that those are very popular options in Vermont. The Ford F-150 is the most registered vehicle in the state. So I'm looking forward to seeing some options in that realm before too long. So thanks so much for joining. And for folks who might have questions for Susan, you can use the chat and we'll circle back and ask those at the end.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Next up, we've got Spencer Putnam, who's going to be talking about his experience. He's had both an all-electric Nissan Leaf as well as a plug-in hybrid Chevrolet Volt. So he's kind of lived both sides of it. So Spencer, make sure you're unmuted and look forward to hearing what your experience has been like.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder to unmute myself. I had forgotten. But pictured is a 2015 Leaf. So it's already 5.5 years old. I forgot to check the mileage. I think it has only about 30,000 miles on it. The license plate says SunPower, and that's quite literally true because we also have solar panels on our roof. And when we plug this in at our house, it's being directly powered by SunPower. And this car, when it was new, had a range of around 100 miles, around 70 to 80 in the winter is our experience. We bought this with the optional attachment so that you can use a high-speed level 3 charger. That didn't come standard at the time, as far as I know, still doesn't, but that's essential if you're going to take it any distance. Frankly, we don't use this car very much for distance travel. And now that we have a second car, Chevrolet Volt, which we bought in 2017, we don't use the Leaf at all for long distance travel. But one of the things that I noticed right away with an all-electric car is that you really have to plan your trips carefully. This is getting less difficult now that there are more charging stations coming online. But you need to think about what your range is and use one of the apps that's available or the kind of map that Dave showed us earlier to see where there are charging stations and plan on going there and plugging in and doing something else while it gets charged up. So that's why it's important to have a high-speed adapter, because if you are reliant on level 2, it can take several hours to get back up to a full charge. So for one example, from our house to Montpelier is about 50 miles. And if we drive to Montpelier and plug in there at a level 2 charger, in 3 hours or so, we've got enough charge to come back home again. So the need to plan your trips and the need to spend more time you normally do are two of the things that we learned about all electric cars. Now, this is less true with the new models that get more miles, have more range, and as I mentioned before, that there are more charging stations. We decided in 2017 to get a gas-electric hybrid. The Chevy Volt, which by the way is no longer in production, but that's an example of a car that has both the all-electric mode, but it also has an internal combustion engine. And in a way, this is the most complicated combination you can imagine, because it's got all the complications of an internal combustion engine and the electric drivetrain. But it does offer complete flexibility and complete security in terms of range anxiety. In fact, the transition from electric power to gasoline power is seamless. You have to be listening carefully to hear the engine come on. So that has worked very well for us. And now that we have both of these cars, we tend to use the Leaf around town and the Volt whenever we go out of town. And here's another example. Today, we drove the Volt from Weybridge, where we live, to Barnard, which is about 70 miles. We could not have made that round trip in an electric car. We went to a state park there. There was no place to plug in. And with a car with a range of only 100 miles or so, we wouldn't have been able to get home without stopping somewhere along the way to charge up. With the Volt, we got down there on electric power and came back on gasoline, basically. We are now thinking about, actually the Leaf we purchased outright, expecting to hang on to it indefinitely, and it's very low maintenance and so far is doing just fine. The Volt we leased because we thought that we probably would want to make a change before too long. And so now that the lease is about to run out, we're looking seriously at going all electric. And we now have options that go more than twice as far as the Leaf on a charge. So we'll be looking at, actually going to go to the website that Dave has described and look at all the options and see if we can get completely off internal combustion engines. We've been very satisfied with both cars. They handle beautifully. They're very peppy. They're very quiet, and they don't take much in the way of maintenance. So if we can find an all-electric car that we think will meet our needs, well, that's probably the plunge we're going to make. As long as we're a two-car family, we'll have 2 all-electric cars. So I think that covers pretty much what I have to say, Dave. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Vance, and thanks for raising, haven't spent much time talking about what a joy EVs can be to drive. Their electric motors have instant torque, which basically means when you put your foot on the pedal, they move nicely, and some faster than others. Of course, Teslas are known for being extremely fast, but even a Nissan Leaf or Chevrolet Bolt or some of the models that don't have that reputation, they still have a lot of zip, a lot of fun to drive. They're very quiet and comfortable. So that is a huge selling point for people that, unfortunately, in days gone by, we would have had an event sometimes where people can get behind the wheel and experience that for themselves. But with physical distancing, we're not able to do that so much this year. But if you haven't tried an EV, I encourage you to go check one out. Maybe you have a friend or neighbor who's willing to let you experience theirs, or auto dealers are still open and offering test drives. So that's another way to have that experience before you make a purchase. Spencer also mentioned some of the wrinkles in terms of making sure you get a DC fast charger. I'm just going to pull up on the Drive Electric Vermont website. At the very top of every page, there's a little link that says download our fact sheet. And if you click on that, it'll open up a PDF that just has some basic information on the first page. And then the second page is a table that we try to keep updated pretty regularly. Last updated this just a few weeks ago. And if you zoom in, you can see there's a column here that says DC fast charging, and it will say if it's available. It'll say which type of plug it's using. And in the case of the Nissan Leaf, it is optional on the base Leaf model. So it is something that we highly recommend folks consider, even though it is an additional cost. Or if you step up to the Leaf Plus, which has 226 miles of range, then it is a standard equipped option there. So a lot of people find this a handy resource. It also has the tax credit amount, the lease pricing, and down payment information for sort of general lease deals that have been advertised by the automakers. So want to open it up to questions. We've had a few come through, so I'll just start running through those. First question, does cold weather also affect the range of an electric bike? And I believe the answer to this is yes, although I also know that there are people who use their electric bikes in winter. You can get studded bike tires and other equipment that makes it a more comfortable, safe experience. So it's certainly viable to use them in the winter. I don't know, Susan, sounds like you're a fairly recent purchaser of an electric bike, but have you had any experience with yours in colder weather?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. So I think it may depend on the bike as well. So that may be something to ask your local bike shop or do a little online research if you're thinking about using one in the winter. And there are, Local Motion has a e-bike lending library that if you're in the Burlington area, and they have worked with some other communities to bring that to other parts of the state. And so I would encourage, if you want to research this further, you might check in with Local Motion. They have a lot of great e-bike knowledge there. Next question, is there data on the frequency and cost of battery failure? Do manufacturers warranty the batteries? So the batteries have been holding up better than people thought initially. So there's not great data out there in terms of actual failure, but it appears to be pretty low. There were some issues with some of the earlier EV models with specific battery chemistries, and most of those had to do with people living in very high temperature places like Arizona and Texas, where heat is sort of the enemy of battery life, at least for most of the chemistries that automakers are using today. So there is some data out there, and I can share more in a Q&A doc that I'll send around following the webinar with some links to additional information. But basically, you can expect that after going a few 100,000 miles and a couple of years of ownership, you might see a loss of range compared to your original experience of maybe 10%. That can vary depending on the model and how you've been operating it, but you will see less range over time, and it is expected that at some point the batteries may reach the end of their useful life, at least with the current technology. The automakers are working on new battery technology, so Chevrolet and Tesla are talking about their 1,000,000-mile batteries that probably will last as long as a car does. But for the EVs that you're buying today, you can expect to see a bit of range loss over time. If you do see excessive range loss, then the manufacturers do warranty, most of them will warranty the range, assuming that you may have some reduction, but if you have an unusual experience and a significant range loss, then oftentimes they'll be able to help offset the cost of replacing that battery. And if there's a manufacturing defect, they certainly do warranty that along with the rest of the vehicle. So that there are some folks who've run into issues like that. Next question, is there a way to tell which public charging stations may be using green energy? There's no way on the stations themselves at this point in time. It can be a little bit tricky in terms of how you define green energy. So for example, the city of Burlington and Washington Electric Co-op source 100% of their energy from renewable sources, but some of that involves using renewable energy credits and things like that to account for energy. So if you want to be sure that you're using energy from solar or other renewable sources, then one thing to consider is putting solar panels on your house if that's viable for you, and that can offset a lot of your energy use. And here's a related question to that for Spencer. Did you have to add solar panels for car charging, or did you plan your array to ensure enough kilowatt hours to handle 2 EVs?
Yeah, excellent question. We found that we did not have enough solar panels for the second car. So we had to get more solar panels in a remote location. We have solar panels in Groton, Vermont. So when we charging both cars and running the house, we needed about twice as much energy as the solar panels on the house, which was a net zero house to begin with, in order to have enough energy to stay net zero. I will say that we're driving a lot less in the last few months than we were, but so now we may actually be a little bit positive in our production. But under normal conditions, we did have to buy additional energy production.
Yep. So great, thanks, Spencer. Another question, beyond the decrease in range in winter, any issues with winter travel such as traction, slipping, etc.? And so this can vary depending on the model, but in general, EVs tend to have better traction than comparable gasoline vehicles because the batteries are pretty heavy and they're mounted with usually an even weight distribution low to the ground. So that helps. It's kind of like driving with sandbags over your axles. So it helps press the vehicle down and provides a little more grip on the road. Still definitely recommend winter tires. That's the single most important thing you can do for improving your winter traction, more so than all-wheel drive. So especially if you're living in a more rural area, which maybe doesn't get plowed as frequently or has a little more snow, definitely strongly advise winter tires. And they do make winter tires for EV models. You will probably see a little bit of a range hit because the tires, either summer tires or all seasons that come from the factory, tend to have lower rolling resistance to improve their efficiency and give you a little more range. So you will have a little bit of a range hit in winter using winter tires, but most people find that trade-off more than worth it. So question about what about the used EV market? How much of a discount compared to used gas models? It really varies depending on the model. We have on the Drive Electric website, I will pull up, we've got a blog here, and we've got a few articles about some different aspects of EVs, and we have one here that talks in depth about used electric cars. And so here are some of the models that we've seen available used sort of within a reasonable range of Vermont as of last August. So this is getting on time to be updated. But you can see for like a Chevrolet Volt at that point in time, price, minimum price advertised was around $7,000 for a used model, and the median price, so roughly average, is about $19,000, and that's compared to over $30,000 for a new model. So basically, as soon as you drive an EV off the lot, you're losing that federal tax credit amount if the vehicle is eligible for that. So there can be a pretty significant hit in depreciation if you're purchasing a new vehicle outright. So important to keep that in mind. And I should also add that we're just touching on some of these questions, but if we're not covering everything that folks want to hear, you can always drop us a line. We do have on our website, contact us, and you can send us an email or an inquiry, and we'll try to get back to you with more information on your specific questions if we're not covering it here tonight. I know, Susan, you mentioned, it sounds like you've purchased a few used Prius plugins. How was your experience? Did you feel like you got a pretty good deal on those, or anything you would add?
Yes, I've had no mechanical problems. Well, except for the fact that it's a Prius and it's so low to the ground, and I've had sort of gotten just about stuck and lost a cover for a muffler just because I wasn't thinking about that low slung aspect. But other than that, they've been, they're not rusty. These are 2012 and 2013 models, and there's been no mechanical reason to take them anywhere to be worked on.
And the batteries are holding up fine, sounds like.
Yes, they are. Oh, Dan, could you talk? Do you have other questions about these? I've heard about someone who will come to your house with a new battery to replace your old battery. I mean, are you going to touch on that a little bit? Other businesses that are kind of getting into the battery business?
I hadn't planned to, but that's a good prompt. So, people are still kind of figuring out, what is the life of the batteries in the vehicle, and when those useful lives are reached, how do we make sure that the batteries are reused or recycled responsibly? And so there are some businesses that are starting to, take older batteries and trade and provide sort of like a remanufactured battery. Haven't heard too much of that happening in Vermont at this point. So if anybody has heard of that, welcome you to send us a note. But it's definitely sort of out there in the world that these things are developing, and expect to see more of that in the future as hopefully we'll see more of these batteries coming out of the vehicles. And one more thing to just mention about batteries, it is, as they reach the end of their useful life in the vehicle, they may still be perfectly well suited for like stationary energy storage at somebody's home or business. So like the Tesla Powerwalls that Green Mountain Power and other folks are using. There are, a number of pilot tests using used EV batteries that have been pulled out of vehicles for those types of stationary applications where you can get maybe a few more years of useful life out of them before they reach the end of the road, so to speak, and need to be recycled. Another question here, what's the difference between plug-in and non-plug-in hybrids? So the difference is basically the plug. Can they be recharged from an external source of power? So a regular sort of non-plug-in hybrid is still totally powered by gasoline, fossil fuel. Certainly much more efficient than typical gasoline vehicles, but you don't have that ability to pull in electricity from the grid to charge up a battery. And most of the plug-in hybrids tend to have larger batteries than the non-plug-in models as a result of that. Question about, are all electric vehicles lighter weight? And if so, are they more likely to have control issues in winter without all-wheel drive? So talked about this a little bit. It does depend on the model of the vehicle, but they typically aren't super lightweight because the batteries are pretty heavy, and the bigger the battery in terms of range, probably the heavier the vehicle is going to be, at least with our current battery technology. It's hard to say in terms of control issues in winter without all-wheel drive. Most of them are front-wheel drive. There are a few that are rear-wheel drive. So they tend to work as good or better than comparable gasoline models, but for some people who live in rural areas on steep hills and things of that sort, you may want to really hold off and get all-wheel drive in addition to winter tires. I have another question here. Is it advisable to work with an EV dealership that is close to home? Are visits to the dealership likely to be fairly regular? Most dealerships are in Burlington or Rutland, which is a 2-hour drive from where I live in Windsor County. You can purchase an EV from any dealer. So, if it's in Vermont, there are dealers who will pass through the state incentive at the point of sale, which is advantageous. But if you wanted to buy in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, you can. And as long as your dealer who's closer to home is EV certified, which unfortunately not every dealer in Vermont is, but if they are EV certified and you have a warranty issue or something of that sort, then you don't have to go back to the dealership you purchased from. You hopefully can get that taken care of closer to home. So, you know, it depends though. I mean, a lot of people find that working with a dealer that's closer to home just feels more comfortable and certainly more convenient than a long drive and a long day purchasing a vehicle. But they're, you know, there's no right or wrong answer there. I would say it's kind of personal preference, and a lot of people, of course, will shop around. And these days, you can do a lot of shopping online or over the phone. So rather than, you know, traveling around the state to all the dealers, reaching out to them over the phone or via their internet websites, give you a chance to do some price comparison shopping and find hopefully what's a good deal for you. And we do have on the Drive Electric website, again, under this Why Go Electric page, we've got a listing of Vermont dealerships. You can filter it by different makes. So if you're looking for a Toyota, these are all the Toyota dealers in the state that have been selling EVs. And then some of them are offering the point of sale incentives for the Vermont Incentive Program. So you can filter that list this way. Another question, why do plug-in hybrid electric vehicles have such a low range on electric only? It's really sort of a cost benefit that the manufacturers consider. The bigger batteries cost more money, and if you have that gasoline backup, they sort of figure, you know, most people, when you look around the country, don't drive more than 40 miles a day. So if you can have a range that's kind of in that sweet spot where most of people's daily travel can be done on the battery, but then any longer trips, you have the flexibility to run on gasoline, as Spencer was talking about their experience with their Volt. You know, then that's a way to make the vehicles more affordable and kind of leverage the technology. But you know, at some point in the future, as battery technology continues to improve and prices come down, we might start seeing plug-in hybrids that do have more range. Would expect to see that. Question here, comment, Consumer Reports is now giving Hyundai's Kona and Kia's Niro a better grade than the Nissan Leaf, yet you've hardly mentioned them. Is that because there are too few of those dealers in Vermont? I don't mean to slight the Kona or the Niro. They certainly are on our website, and just don't have time to get into all of the options that are available, but they are, the Kona certainly has been really popular. There are maybe fewer dealers than some of the more traditional automakers, but there are Vermont dealers selling the Kona Electric and the Kia Niro, which comes in both an all-electric and a plug-in hybrid option. So, you know, definitely worth considering if you're in the market. Another question. Most batteries are best used if run from full charge to low charge. If used in a narrow range, they develop a narrow operating range given the length of time required for miles per hour charge. This sounds like a serious limitation. So the batteries in EVs have pretty sophisticated battery management systems that generally avoid those types of what sometimes people call memory issues, where you need to worry about, you know, charging and discharging. Typically, if you just make sure that you fully charge the vehicle every now and then and run it maybe not fully low, but, you know, run it down to a little bit lower state of charge, they should be fine over a fairly long period of time. If you really want to optimize your battery health over the long term, you can potentially reduce the amount of fast charging you do, which there is some research that suggests fast charging tends to heat up the batteries and can have some issues down the line with shortening the battery life a bit. And then also maybe not fully charging the vehicle, so trying to keep it in a state of charge range between 20 and 80%. So it's less of an issue with plug-in hybrids, which tend to be a little more conservative with how they treat the battery. But with certain all-electric models, it can be an issue. And definitely there may be variations from one model to the next, so important to pay attention to what the owner's manual of your specific vehicle tells you to do to maximize your battery life. If they, many owners' manuals will have guidance on charging and longevity in that respect. So question, are utilities increasing their electrical capacity as increasing numbers of people go with all electric cars? And right now, utilities are actually seeing overall a little bit less electric use, and this is even before COVID, because of improved efficiency. So LED and CFL light bulbs and other efficient technologies have put downward pressure on electric use over time. And fortunately, with the level 2 chargers that, say, Green Mountain Power is offering, they actually have the capability to remotely manage when charging is occurring during peak periods. So on super hot days, like we've had a few of lately, and the cost for electric power on those days really goes much higher than normal, Green Mountain Power will send an alert out, usually about a day or at least several hours in advance, to say, we're going to turn off your charger between, say, 5 and 8 p.m. unless you click this button to opt out of that. So you can still opt out if you know that you need to charge, but if you don't need to charge, then it gives them the flexibility to make sure that they're using their resources as efficiently as possible and also saving dollars. And that all helps to increase the amount of electricity that folks are using. And what that can do is actually help provide some downward pressure on electric rates. So there may be a point in the future if we see a lot more people going driving electric vehicles in the state, where there may be some upgrades necessary in certain areas, especially if there's a lot of fast charging. But we're a long way from that point, and I think at least my conversations with utilities, I tend to think that'll be a good problem to have, as long as we're being smart about our charging in the meantime. Another question here, does any company besides Nissan offer additional incentives beyond the federal, state, or utility incentives? So like the $4,000 discount that I mentioned for the Leaf. Nissan is the company that has done the most of that, those fleet tail programs, but any automaker at any point in time may have sort of monthly deals that they're offering on their vehicles, depending on inventory and other things that they're juggling. So, a lot of people kind of provide that advice to go shopping around the end of the month, which is when dealers and automakers are looking to meet sales goals. So you might find that you'll be hearing about more discounts or other ways to save money in those periods when they're really hungry for those sales. But at this point, Nissan is the only company that has that kind of standard fleet tail program. And I think we're running a little bit longer than our hour. I think we'll maybe answer one more question, and then I'll open it up for Susie, Spencer, or Susan to add anything else, and then we can wrap up for the evening. So this last question then, do you think that this is a good time, COVID, to get bargains since so many people are off shopping? Maybe. So it's certainly dealers, sales were way down in April. Many of the dealers were closed, but have reopened since then. But of course, a lot of the automakers shut down their production lines around those times as well. So depending on the automaker, there may be some brands that have more inventory than others. And when you have more inventory, it's more likely that you're going to be finding a bargain and other discounts. So, I would say it could depend on the model vehicle, but as we kind of reach the end of the 2020 model year, around this time, we tend to see a few more discounts popping up on those new models. So there may be some good discounts, but it's likely to vary from dealer and model to model. So with that, Susie, Susan, or Spencer, anything else you would like to add before we sign off for the evening?
I think given where we are in the hour, we'll probably close up. The only thing I'd add is if for anyone who likes music, having an electric car is a great thing because it's quiet and you can really enjoy full sound that you couldn't enjoy in a typical gas-powered car. So that's a real bonus, the quiet of a car. But otherwise, I'd just like to say thank you for everybody for taking an hour out of their evening for joining us. And thank you, Dave, for a great presentation. And thanks, Susan, and thank you to Spence for sharing your experience.
I did have a couple of things. Somebody asked about whether you can be sure that the power you're using is renewable, and there are a few charging stations. I'm pretty sure the ones at Castleton University are an example where they're actually attached to solar panels that feed right into them. And the other one is that I get unsolicited offers from the dealer we bought our Leaf from to trade it in or even bring it in without a trade. So I think there is increasing interest in used electric vehicles. So you're not going to be saddled with it forever.
Great. Thanks, Spence. Anything else on your end, Susan?
No, thank you. I think it's been a great presentation. I've learned a lot.
Great. All right. Well, with that then, thanks everybody for joining. We'll be processing the recording and putting together some Q&A, and we'll be circulating that to everyone who signed up. Hopefully get that out to you sometime tomorrow. So it takes a little while. We won't be able to do it tonight, but stay tuned to your email. And as I said, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions in the future. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.